Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. You may know him as A.J. Tata. That's what it says on the front cover of his best-selling thriller novels that feature Jake Mahegan. Anthony Tata, or Tony as many in North Carolina call him, has always loved to write. But the writing took a backseat during his other careers, in education, in politics, and most notably in the 28 years he served in the United States Army, rising to the rank of Brigadier General. I learned during our sit-down interview that career may not have happened at all had it not been for Tony Tata's athletic ability.
I got recruited by West Point to wrestle, and so I went there and wrestled and played baseball. But importantly, both my parents were school counselors at the time, and they understood the deal with colleges and all that, and two teachers, counselors, have modest means, and here they've got service academies recruiting their kids, and we lived in a big military area, and of course my dad did serve 2 years as a private in the Army back in the 50s. He got drafted and did his tour, and then came home and started coaching football.
So but both your parents were teachers. Ever give a thought to education before you got into it later in your career?
Yeah, well, that was really what my plan was. And then when I got into West Point, of course, I got switched on to leadership. And when I was at West Point as an athlete, and certainly as an athlete in high school, pretty decent baseball player, played on a couple of state championship teams, placed fourth in the state in wrestling. The leadership you learn as an athlete, particularly of team sports, and that translates very well over to the military because, and I really looked at serving in the military as sort of my version of being a professional athlete. I was a paratrooper and all of those things, and I got to do tough things, leading men and women in combat, and that was to me like being paid to be at the top of my game, and so it was all very relational to me, both being an athlete and being a leader. And
growing up in the Virginia, Norfolk area, what did somewhere around
Norfolk,
there? So
Virginia
that is
Beach,
a
right.
lot of military.
Yeah.
What did you do as a kid? What was Tony's?
I was my dad was a football coach, and my mom was a school counselor, and we played sports. That was our thing. And I was also a big reader. So those two things sort of set the foundation for what I ended up doing in life. And as I explained, the sports athletics led to some scholarships from many different schools, but West Point, I was sort of nudged into that lane by my parents. Like, well, if you get hurt, then and so when that 5-year commitment, when that 5 years came up, I really determined that I loved serving in the military and enjoyed the camaraderie and was making good friends, was being rewarded with promotions and that kind of thing, and it was all happening in the right way for me. And then the reading aspect turned into this love of writing, and I've always written, John, ever since I was a child, and so those two things really sort of became my main deals. And then once I got out of the military, I knew I wanted to get into education, and so prior to getting out, I was recruited to attend a superintendent's academy, and that certification then led to Chief Operating Officer, Washington, D.C., whereas at the eye of the hurricane, most exciting couple of years in education reform with Michelle Rhee, and then Wake County, another exciting couple of years for lots of different reasons.
Right.
Yeah, but we made some great gains at Wake County, and it was a school system, I believe, in absolutely being in the right place at the right time, and I was the right person for that system at that time. I came in, I walked the tightrope right down the middle, and brought the community together and helped them begin to heal, and that's what they needed. And we focused once again on children instead of politics, and the scores, they had the best scores they'd had in the history of the school system, particularly low-income children. For the first time in the history of the system, broke the state average, if you can believe this, broke the state average for their subgroup in No Child Left Behind. So there are a lot of things that happened that were really, really good in Wake County, and it's just unfortunate the way politics overruled children.
Yeah. And I want to get into the political side, because then you went in to serve with Governor McCrory and got into statewide politics.
Right.
But when you were in the military and started that career that ended up being 28 years, Hawaii, Georgia, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom, Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Tell us about some of those places that you served in, because I would think, to my point, I've seen videos sent back from some of those places overseas, the Bosnias, the Kosovos. When you're over there and serving, is it as bad as the average American sees it to be?
Yes, and if not worse. And the one enduring lesson I learned from all of those tours, regardless of where I was, is that America is a great place, and many Americans, a great majority of Americans who have not really had the chance to dive in and do research or visit or whatever, do not realize the vast gulf of difference between a Kosovo or a Bosnia or a Afghanistan or an Iraq and America, and our liberties, our freedoms, our infrastructure, our system. And as polarized as things are today, it doesn't even compare to the methods and solutions of solving problems in some of these other places that, frankly, end up, you're in a gunfight. And Afghanistan, my last combat tour, I was in and out of Iraq a few times, but over there, you bond with those people, John, particularly if you're a senior officer. I was a Brigadier General over there, Deputy Commanding General of all the troops there. And so I bonded with all these governors, Afghan governors of different provinces, and they don't want you to go. After 12 months, for the Army, your time is up. Marines, I think, had 6-7 month tours. Air Force was 3 or 4 months. Every service had a different time standard and rotating in and out. But they don't want you to go because they know that you're making change and positive change for them, and they know how far they have to go. And it's such a different lifestyle that we don't, the majority of, even my children, that they don't understand. They hear me talk about it, but it's hard for them to understand. And even if you visited Western Europe or different first world countries, even those, to me, don't compare to America, but you don't get a sense for that big gulf between that and a fourth world country like Afghanistan or a third world country like Kosovo that is just trying, people just trying to scratch out a living. And that's the bottom line. Is at the end of the day, everybody has a list of things that they want to achieve and a list of things that upset them, and where's the balance on that, and how far are they willing to go to get what they want.
What's the most fear you've felt when you've been in one of those places?
Yeah. There are two things that come to my mind, John. One is from Kosovo and Macedonia, and one is from Afghanistan. And I'll start with Afghanistan. We were flying. It was January of '07, and I had told this captain that I knew. He was up in the northeast province and just in a really tough spot. It was sort of where the Lone Survivor movie action actually took place. Right. Marcus Luttrell and the SEAL team that created that phenomena, and so we came in right on the heels of that, and so our first combat action was to go reclaim all that land, and so we did, and this is about a year later, and we're flying up, and there's. I had been waved off 2 times. I was going up Christmas Eve. I was going up New Year's Eve. It was snow, foggy, couldn't fly. It was about a 2-hour helicopter flight to get out there. And so on January 5th, 2007, it's a crystal clear day, 3 feet of snow everywhere. but I told my aide we're going because
Okay.
I've been and we go, and as we're flying up the valley, as we're getting close, and we had been monitoring some combat in a close but not connected area, and suddenly some holes start appearing in the side of the helicopter, and that's never a good thing. And,
No, I can't imagine it's a good thing.
and the left engine catches on fire, and we come in for what pilots call a hard landing into the base camp. Thankfully, we were that close, and it was just a storm of machine gun fire, rocket propelled grenades, and it was a three-sided ambush. And for 90 minutes, it was just duking out. And so Jimmy McKnight grabs me by the body armor and says, "Sir, the last thing I need is a dead general in my base camp." And I said, "I'm happy to oblige you, Jimmy."
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I mean, as soon as we start kind of jogging toward his bunker, this sergeant gets shot through the arm. I mean, just a hero of mine, Sergeant Vile. And as we get in there, I do the one thing a general can do. A, stay out of the way. B, I pick up the radio and I call and say, "Hey, we're taking some heavy fire here." I call back to Bagram, and suddenly we have a B-1 bomber overhead. We have two A-10s, and we have two brand new Apache helicopters about 30 minutes later because they took a little longer to get here. And McKnight turned to me and said, "Sir, you can fight with me anytime," because that stuff was overhead and helping out.
As long as you bring all the heavy stuff with you, you're good to go, right?
Yeah, and so I mean that was one where it was pretty intense,
right.
and there's this balance, and a part of me wanted to go man the line, and part of me knew that my job was to call in the heavy stuff, and
as a commander, losing a member of your company or group, I imagine, does it just rip your heart out?
Yeah, so Sergeant Vile got shot, and he tied off his own tourniquet, and I watched him perform his mission, and he survived that. He was in a subsequent deployment. I'm sad to say he was killed, but I got to pin on his Purple Heart and all of that. We flew him back that night when I got out of there. But I did probably 90-some what we call ramp ceremonies, John.
Mm-hmm.
Every time we shipped a deceased soldier back, we'd have a ceremony on the ramp and shut down the base and line the streets, and the senior officers would be right there at the ramp of the C-17 aircraft, and the funeral detail would carry the casket, the transfer cases called up, and flag draped, and you just kneel and say a prayer next to it as it's bolted down on the airplane, and that weighs on you, because these are men and women that are under your charge, and you're responsible one way or the other for everything good and everything bad that happens out there, and that's a leadership maxim, and it's also something that you carry with you all the time, and you
still carry that today?
Yeah, I do. I think about I dedicated the first book I wrote. I dedicated to 3 of my lieutenants, because you get real close with the men if you're doing it right, and the men and women you serve with. And Doug Sloan was a major in Afghanistan. He was a lieutenant for me in the 82nd Airborne Division, and he was one of these great leaders that. His troops, he got promoted to major, and his troops petitioned the brigade commander to not rotate him out as would be normal, because a captain commands a company. And so the brigade commander let him stay in for about 4 more months and that kind of thing. And on their changeover day, he gets just decimated by an IED. And my command sergeant major, Jerry Wilson, was killed in Iraq. And just another fluke kind of deal. And I had another lieutenant that turned captain that was killed in Iraq as well, and I went to all 3 of their memorial services or funerals, and I spoke at 2 of them, and I just it's hard to reconcile that they're gone, but you're proud of their service, and then when you see the ebb and flow of the fight, so two of the soldiers I mentioned were killed in Mosul, and then when ISIS takes Mosul, you say, what's up with that? Why couldn't we at least keep the gains that these soldiers, American soldiers, fought and died for? And so for me, that's the hard part to come to terms with is when and there's so many men and women, and I talked about this on a TV show not too long ago about when ISIS had taken Fallujah and Ramadi and Mosul, and it was, we've had blood and treasure, fight and die for these, and so we should have at least done our best to hang on to it and not leave it. And so that's the part that everybody who signs up, John, as a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, they know they're going to war. In the last 16 years, if you've signed up, you've known you're going to war,
right?
And so there's something to be said, and the recruiting and the retention have been exceeding standards and all of that, and so we've got a great country with people that want to do the right thing and go serve and be part of this country's history and legacy, that trying to secure freedom and democracy and protect us against terrorism.
You, after 28 years, do you then decide to get out?
Right.
I don't want to dredge up bad, but what in your mind was the reason that you wanted to get out?
Well, there were a few things. One is I got a multi-book contract, and so that multi-book contract was the real impetus for me getting out, and then the opportunity to go serve as I was recruited to go serve in this Broad Academy. And
that's the one that trains superintendents.
They train superintendents, and so I was at a point where I was young enough to have a second career. I was a very young general. I was first promoted. Me and Dan Allen, who's now the Vice Chief Staff of the Army, were the first ones from our West Point class, first men promoted to general, and so I took a look at it and assessed opportunities, and went on from there, and it made a very, very personal decision to say, I've done my 28 years. In the last 7 years, you've either been in war or out of war, and getting ready to go to war, and so that was the big overriding factor.
So you go to D.C. and you work in D.C. and basically in a military type of, you were COO of the public schools, but it was almost like a military kind of assignment there, was it not?
Yeah, it's interesting. Michelle Reed just emailed me last night asking me if I was going to be in Raleigh in a couple of weeks. She's coming out. We remain really good friends, and she
was the superintendent at the time.
She was a chancellor, and she owned a company called the New Teacher Project, and she was the first person President Trump interviewed to be, then President-elect Trump, to be Secretary of Education. And she's just a tremendous educator, a lot of energy, super smart. And so she was on the board of the Broad Foundation that ran this Superintendent's Academy. And, for me, she had someone give me a call and say, hey, you're in the D.C. area. Michelle needs somebody to run her show so she can focus on academics and teacher pay for performance and all the reforms she was trying to do. And I said, I think that's a good thing for the first step for me before I go. And it was exactly what I wanted to do, and it was a perfect fit.
Procurement, stuff of that nature.
Well, it was everything that wasn't academia, and even then, so it was finances, procurement, all the buildings, the construction, the everything that a chief operating officer in a school system normally does.
Okay.
And then I was part of all of the reform efforts as well, because the cabinet meetings that we had, you discussed all that and you got input, and so it was a great place both to learn and to input into changes, because there's a lot. The Army is one of the best teaching and learning institutions in the world, and a lot of people don't understand that there's a huge parallel between the academic bureaucracy and the military bureaucracy, and in academia the languages are different, but you have task conditions and standards in the military, and then you have learning objectives and your curriculum, and it's all the same stuff, and
Right.
and you're trained to execute your mission in the military, and you train teachers to teach in the classroom, and you're graded on how well you accomplish both of them. It's very, very similar, and so I would get asked that a lot when I was at Wake County, in particular, as superintendent, and I did 830 community meetings, whether it was teachers, town halls, political parties, whatever. And I would get these, snipers from the audience say, well, if you've never been a teacher, how do you feel like you can lead this system? And I would say, well, the Army is the best teaching and learning institution in the country. And let me tell you, it's, I'm in the classroom and I'm listening, and it's my job is not so much to teach the teacher, it's to make sure she or he is properly resourced. And so it's a leadership function as much as it is anything else. So.
Did you think, because after you go to D.C., you go to Raleigh or Wake County, you get the superintendent, it's a split vote of the board to hire you.
Right.
And so that's got to come with some criticism. So did at any point in time you sit back and say, man, this may not be for me, this may have been over my head?
No, it was not over my head, and I never believed that it would be. When the day after I did the interview, the search consultant called me and said, "You just took a 5-4 board and made them 9-0," and then all the messaging starts from the special interest groups that didn't want. There's a huge anti-military left group within, inside the Beltline of Raleigh, just anti. And they showed up. I was getting 3 new JROTC programs in no time flat for 3 of our most troubled schools from a discipline standpoint, and there was a long line of people that lined up that were speaking against it. I had the votes, we got it through, and they're doing great, and the principals love it. But I was like, how can somebody not appreciate the fact that the military? And so there was some of that, and so some of these people, I did a big interview with the NNO before I started, and asked me a similar question. Hey, people writing cartoons about you and that kind of thing. How does that make you feel? And I just said, these are the same people that preach tolerance, and that preach diversity, that preach trying to understand everybody's point of view. And already they're judging me, and they haven't met me, and so they just ought to pay attention to themselves and look in the mirror a little bit. And I came into that community, and I listened to everybody. I gave everybody an audience. I would go to them; they could come to me. And the week that I got there, based on a previous assessment, Advanced Ed, the accreditation agency, SACS, had downgraded Wake County's governance or accreditation to warned, which is one step above probation. And so, boom, I walk in, and that's what I'm handed. And I said, all right, we'll get after this. I mean, we had like a 50-point plan, and there were 7 key areas. And in November, they came back in. We had accomplished just about everything, and they issue a report, and the bottom line of the report was there's consensus that Superintendent Tata and his leadership has brought this community back together, and the school system's headed in the right direction. And that was sort of the affirmation of all the hard work, because I had a currency that nobody else had, and that was I had talked to more people from all around the county than anybody else in the school system, any board member, anybody. And so that was my own form of currency that I could say, yeah, but it's a little different over in Zebulon, or it's a little different up in Wake Forest, or it's
because everybody thinks their school is the most important,
or yes, their school or their region or their program or their whatever, and it could be important, but they're balancing a system like that had so many Band-Aids, and they had some of the largest achievement gaps in the country between Asian, white, Hispanic, black, and their head was in the sand, quite frankly, because they thought they had this fabulous system that was, there was this thing, there are no bad schools in Raleigh. Well, we've got great principals in Wake County, and that's why there's no bad schools, but there were huge achievement gaps, and there were children that were suffering because of the movement around, sending kids to Apex and Cary and Wake Forest and other places when they could have just gone across the street to their neighborhood school. And I went to lots of Southeast Raleigh churches, and at invitation of the pastors. And afterward, I spent hours there, and I would afterward, I'd hold a little session, and the parents would walk me out and say, so I'd say, Mr. Tata, you see that elementary school right there? That's where I want my child to go to. I don't have a car. I can't drive to Apex and go to his and meet with his teacher, meet with his principal, see his sporting event, watch his chess club, whatever the issue was. And so we made great progress on that, and I was very proud that I found about $20 million, and this is just an example of the lethargy of a school system. Sometimes they had $20 million of unused Title I funds, and Title I funds is federal funds for low-income children. Right. And I said, what were you saving this for in case we needed it, was the response I got. And I'm like, have you checked the scores lately? And
seems to me like you might need it
it's
right now.
A rainy day fund. It's storming outside.
Right.
And it's not that bad. And I'm like, because everybody was in this just mind meld that things were perfect. And so and it's a tough balancing act, because these were all really good people that were trying to do the right thing. And so you got to reinforce them that they're good people, but you also got to show them that perhaps there's a different way of doing the mission that needed to be done, so that we can help the children. And you got to invert the whole system so that it's focused on the children and not on the adults.
So then you go from that, and let's just call it a storm, and then you get into statewide politics. And sitting here and listening to you, I would have to retroactively ask you why on God's green earth you did that. You went to work for Pat McCrory.
I did. I had a lot of different options coming out of Wake County, and I had already accepted, quite frankly, John, a dean position at a university. And I just said, let me start in January. This was in September when everything in Wake County kind of came to an end. And so I took a couple of months off and sort of got my bearings, and because I was heartbroken. I really was, coming out of Wake County. I was absolutely heartbroken, because I'd put so much into that, and it was such a petty political thing that happened there. The board got taken to the woodshed for being juveniles, as they should have. And then I get a call from Pat McCrory, who I'd never met before. And he says, hey, I would like to interview you to be my education guy. And I said, okay, well, this is in the education domain. And I get in there, and he keeps flipping my resume over, and he says, so you were in the Army, too, so you know how to do logistics, so you know how to do, like, transportation stuff. And my antenna starts going way up, and I said, yeah, but I'm an educator now, and I'm really into the education thing. And I honestly went surfing for a week into the Dominican Republic, and which is sort of my getaway, my surfing. And I miss a call from him, and I'm in the small airplane section of San Juan Airport, and people are carrying chickens and pigs by and all that, and I'm talking to the governor-elect, And he's like, I want you to be my Secretary of Transportation, and I need an answer now. And
Wow.
And
Not even think about it over the weekend.
well, I think he thought I had thought about it, and I was privileged that I was honored that he asked me, and I was privileged to serve. And here was another example. So this goes back. Being Secretary of Transportation was very much akin to being a general, where you have this broad. I had 14 divisions, and we're in Division 3 here in Wilmington, and this broad area. You have these division engineers that are kind of like your brigade commanders, and there's 14 of them, and there's a very clear chain of command, and there's a 12,000 person bureaucracy. It's kind of the size of an army division, and you also have the opportunity to engage with so many small communities because you got a $4.5 billion budget. Everybody's your friend,
and everybody wants their road paved, and their bridge built, and everything.
And there were some projects. My goal was to get as much of that money spent on the high priority, the high needs projects as we could, because there's always some people think, oh, you got $4 billion and all. It's hard to spend $4 billion every year. And
is it really?
It is because you got to get contracts, you got to get contractors, you got to put stuff out for bid, you got to go through all that formal process. And I was signing about 150 million ish every month in contracts, and for road stuff. And I was just trying to move everything to the left as quickly as I could, so that
from the inbox to the outbox, and get on with something else.
Well, it just to get things done, because it takes so long to get things done, and people want it done because at the end of the day, connectivity provides opportunity. Whether it's an education opportunity, a job opportunity, a recreation opportunity, and all of that helps the economy. And so what I learned is, I had 88,000 miles of roadway, second largest state-owned system in the country, 22 ferries with 7 routes, 2 seaports, 72 airports, a state-owned railroad, CSX, Norfolk Southern, and their railroads, and then transit, and the list goes on, DMV, and it was something that I loved doing and enjoyed incredibly.
But was there a burnout factor, though?
Yeah, a little bit.
Got to be in 2015?
Well, I would say, there again, I got a really nice book deal, and I just said,
right.
Governor, I can't do both, because I was trying a little bit to do both, and it was kind of bringing some, I don't know if it was negative attention, but it was, why is the secretary also publishing a book? And so then I just said, look, let me take this boat.
I remember when some of that coverage was coming out.
Yeah, right. And for me, the first book was a paperback. It came out. It did very well, foreign and domestic. And then I got another book deal. And then I said, I'm not going to be able to do both of these. And I could do both of them, but the optics on it, the perception would be something that perhaps the governor didn't want.
Explain Alden Rock to me.
Aiden Rock.
Aiden Rock? Okay, Aiden Rock. I thought it was Alden.
Yeah, that was a pseudonym back when I was in the Army. I self-published my first book. Okay, the only thing I've ever self-published, Rogue Threat, and just because I was active duty and all that, and I gave all the royalties to USO Metro DC, and then I got a book deal out of that. That's what got me the book deal. Is that book sold very well, Rogue Threat, and a publisher came to me and said, "This is really good. We want to give you a traditional book deal." And I said, "Great." And that's how all that. And then they said, "But we got to use your real name and all of that." And
Where did you pick the name? Was it just
my wife?
I looked down and I saw a rock on the street or whatever.
No, my wife picked it. It was just some weird name that nobody would be able to guess my name from it. So, Yeah.
And then you did 3 more of the Threat series before you came out with your first, as you said,
So that
real
was
book deal.
So the first real book deal I had was for the Threat series. That was from a traditional publisher, Variance Publishing, and they gave me a good deal, and those books sold a lot of books. And Sudden Threat, Rogue Threat, and Hidden Threat were the 3 I did with Variance. And
Matt Garrett and then his niece then kind of took over.
Amanda Garrett, Zach's daughter, in a great book, Mortal Threat. That book was written, but Variance had some issues, and so I had Mortal Threat written and ready to go. And so when Kensington Books then gives me my big publishing contract, with the Jake Mahegan series, my agent said, Tony, let's take Mortal Threat. Trident Media Services, my agency, has a ebook division. We'll publish that through the Trident ebook division. We'll tease it. We'll tease Foreign and Domestic with the first 2 chapters in the back of Mortal Threat, and it'll just be an ebook out there. And they did a thing called BookBub, and they sent it out there across the ebook reader land for free, and it had like 35,000 downloads, and that's what kind of sparked interest in Foreign and Domestic, because people got done reading Mortal Threat, and then the next 2 chapters, it was like, read exciting preview from Foreign and Domestic, and then Foreign and Domestic was number 6 on Barnes & Noble's bestseller list its first week, and number 24, something like that, on the second week.
So how do you, we've had this conversation before that I've always been fascinated. I write for a living every day, but my stories are 15 and 20 seconds.
Right.
How do you do the research? Where does the nucleus for an idea for 3 Minutes to Midnight or Besieged or any of them come from?
Yeah, so...
you just roll over and up in the middle of the night and say, hey...
Or just driving around or any part of the day, and thank God for iPhones and the notes function, because... 3 Minutes to Midnight, I was somewhere, and I saw the coolant tower to Sharon Harris nuclear plant, and I had just read an article that showed the fracking zone from Durham County to Moore County, and in the middle of it is Sharon Harris nuclear plant, and it just... I said, nuclear plant, fracking, what could go wrong? And so that was the genesis of the idea that whole book was built around. And then on Foreign and Domestic, I was having a beer with talking to a guy, and I said, so what do you do? I was down in Vieques, Puerto Rico. I said, what do you do down here? What brings you to Vieques? And he said, I'm the bomb disposal contractor. The Navy has a big bombing range out there. If you remember, like 20 years ago, when Clinton was president, closing Vieques was a big deal, and Puerto Rico was up in arms, and so they closed Vieques and Roosevelt Roads, which they didn't want as a secondary impact. But there's this huge bomb disposal effort going on. And I said, what do you do with all the bombs? And he just kind of smiled at me. And I said, there's a good idea.
Okay.
And so, but I wanted to be in lower 48, so I really wanted the first book in the series to be with Mahegan, to be in Dare County, because I make him a Dare County native. He's from Frisco, the Outer Banks, Native American, and I wanted that whole conflict between with the Lost Colony, and he's Croatan, and did they kill the white settlers, or did they go peacefully into the night? And so he's got all of that as his backstory, but. I look, and then there's Dare County Bombing Range. That's an active bombing range right next to the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And I'm like, this is a perfect juxtaposition for Jake Mahegan, who he's violent and he's peaceful, and he just wants peace, but he's got to be violent. And then I superimposed the bomb clearing effort. I fictionally create that. Okay, it's closed down. and they're clearing it, and there's a lot of nefarious stuff going on inside the bombing range. So that's where that came from. And then Besieged essentially was I had read a book called Neurotribes. I'm always reading, and Neurotribes is about on the spectrum of autism, and I thought, it was a real stretch goal. It'd be great to have a young autistic character who can communicate best through code writing, and so that's what I created with Besieged. And there's really 3 points of view. You got Mahegan, you got Darius Mirza, the evil special forces commander from Iran, and then you have Misha, the autistic code writer, 11-year-old girl who gets kidnapped by the Iranians because she knows how to do nanotechnology swarming, and she's written code. She can look at a flock of birds and say why they all go left or go right at the same time, and how all of that happens.
Does that where the research comes in? I mean, obviously there's the nucleus now, and so then you have research to do, and then Tony becomes a researcher for how long?
It's all throughout the book, really. I mean, so the locations of Dare County, Wake County, and New Hanover County for the 3 books. Fortunately, I've been able to go drive, and this is happening at this part of the day, and so I would go at that time in the day, and I would get the shadows just right, and talk about the sun and where it is, and what's north, what's south, and what kind of wildlife lives out there, and just to build in my mind the scene so that I can build the scene in the reader's mind, and so the research for Mortal Threat, that book takes place in Tanzania. Essentially, the log line is that the Amanda Garrett has discovered a cure for Ebola and HIV with this black paste that she's using to treat orphans in Tanzania, and she's attacked by ISIS, who wants to claim the credit for finding the cure, and so she's got a medical cooler with about 48 hours of life on it, and it's a race across the Serengeti with a few syringes.
Would you be as good a writer if you hadn't had the things in your life, both positive and negative? Does all of this make you the writer you are today?
I think you're who you are, the experiences you've had, whether it's been a hugely positive thing or personal attacks or whatever, they forge you to either be a better person, a better writer, a better storyteller, or a less better person, and I think you would, accordingly be less better at everything. And so my life experiences, John, I sure, have I made mistakes? Have I had things go wrong that I would prefer to have happen differently? Of course. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I feel like I've accomplished a lot in my life, and I've been a true public servant of the people. I gave up a lot to come down to Wake County. I took about a 50% pay cut. And I came down. I was sitting on 2 corporate boards. I was on Fox News just about 5-6 times a week. I was writing books, and I was a chief operating officer up there, and really making headway. And so I said, this is a community that needs leadership right now, and I felt like I was the right person at the right time to do it. And for every positive thing that's happened, I'll tell you, last night I met a friend for dinner at Dockside, and I come walking in the Dockside, and someone stands up and says, "Mr. Tata, I've always wanted to meet you. Good to see you. My wife's a teacher at Wake County. She loves you." And you can't buy that.
No.
And it's...
That means you've made an impact in somebody's life that you didn't know beforehand.
Right.
But I would think with all the characters that you've got to put into books, that maybe you remember that teacher, that one person, and then if you need a teacher here or there, do you ever give anybody any kind of due later on that way?
What I do is I pull positive attributes and qualities from people,
right?
That I think I find honorable, and they go into the protagonist, and when I see self-serving and, everything that nobody likes, really, that kind of goes into the antagonist. And then you kind of got to mix it up a little bit because your antagonist cannot be entirely a bad guy or a bad gal. There's got to be some redeeming quality there for the reader to connect. And your protagonist can't be like Mr. Perfect or Miss Perfect. There's got to be a little bit of conflict there that makes the reader question. And because nobody's perfect, we're all here on God's green earth, and we're not perfect.
Who do you like reading? Who in your genre do you like reading?
I like reading Lee Child, John Sanford, Brad Thor, Mark Graney, and all these are friends. I've gotten to know them over the years, and it's a very rewarding profession to be in because of the personal relationships you make.
Are you all happy for each other when somebody does well? It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's got to be some kind of competition, but is there more friendship?
No, it's like I'll read a book in 3 or 4 days, maybe a week, depending on my schedule, and so really that's 52 thriller writers that you could read, right? And so I don't feel. And Brad Thor and I over dinner were discussing this one time up in Chicago, and because he really helped me initially. He helped me get that first book deal, and I said, and I sort of said, I'm sure you don't need more competition. He said, no, we need more good thriller writers, because the more good thriller writers we have, the more thriller readers we'll have, and the more that we pull into the genre. And it was that kind of attitude that said, this is something I really want to do, the colleagues that I would like to have. And writing is a very solitary endeavor in one respect, and then in another respect, it's a very collegial endeavor as well, where when you get together, and it's interesting. I just signed up for Thriller Fest. They asked you to sign up for some panels and stuff to come up into July, and it's the 12th year of the Thriller Festival, and I've been about 8 or 9 of them, and it's just the same group of people coming together, and Lee Child is the guest speaker, Lisa Gardner's there, it's all the people that if you like this genre, it's all those people will be there.
How do you want to be remembered best? Writer, military man, education man, dad?
Yeah, a good father, a public servant who made a difference, who cared about the people he led and served.
A.J. Tata, we know you as Tony. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
Tony Tata's thoughts are not all on the written page. You'll see him on the cable news shows, sharing his insights and his military expertise on world events. He's also busy planning Jake Mahegan's next adventure, which he says will be released next January, 2018. If you know someone who would make a good interview for me, drop me an email. It's jevans@wect.com. You can also reach out to me on Twitter or Facebook. I'm on those social media sites every day. I'm John Evans. Thanks for being with us for another episode of One on One.